In the 2013 offseason, the Philadelphia 76ers decided to strip things bare. They scrubbed their entire roster clean, taking off guys like Andrew Bynum and other older vets. They wanted to redirect their franchise completely. They felt like they were in team purgatory. They thought they needed to bulldoze the entire structure out, which wasn't irregular for a rebuilding team, but the 76ers would stretch this to where it hadn't been done before, to start with a clean slate and build slowly and tediously through draft picks. Basically, the 76ers were going scorched earth. Every single player was on the chopping block. They were prepared to deal anyone for a pick and were openly tanking. Even their all-star guard and face of the team, Drew Holiday, wasn't safe, as they shipped him off for Nerlens Noel. They wanted to tear everything down. In the 2013 offseason, 9 guys that were on the roster previously were gone. All of those guys were replaced by D-League players. The 76ers were shamelessly tanking. This caused the 76ers to be an historically awful team. They started off the season at 0-17 one year, had a 28-game losing streak, and almost had the worst record of all time. They knew this too. They wanted this. They planned on tanking, hoping to rebuild their desolated team through high draft picks they got from being so bad. Now, usually, a player that they drafted would eventually be enough to offset the team's shittiness early in the rebuild, which is why we rarely saw teams consistently picking in the top 3. But I think the 76ers went out of their way to pick guys who weren't playing immediately. They drafted Dario Saric, who's gonna play in Turkey. They traded up for Nerlens Noel, who had an ACL injury, and Joel Embiid, who would also be out for a long stretch of time. Anything they could do to make the team worse, extend the time that the team stayed bad to get more draft picks, they did. This was the process. Eventually, it worked out. In 2017, off the back of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, 2 top 3 picks, the 76ers broke out of the absolute torture the past half a decade was and got to 50 wins, earning themselves a playoff spot after putting their franchise through hell. Wells Fargo was electric. The 76ers are back, and even though they didn't win, the process was a success. They looked in the prime position to be future NBA champs. It would be fun going to next season with the outlook that you'll be good, and it was fun. The 76ers even won a series in their first competitive season with a 4-1 victory over the Heat. And even though they turned around and got handed a gentleman's sweep by Boston, that didn't matter. The wait was over. The process was complete. The 76ers organization was reaping the benefits. Now, this past season was nice, but they still wanted to push themselves into a contender category. So when they made a trade for a disgruntled Jimmy Butler and a deal for Tobias Harris, they went from a starry-eyed up-and-coming team, a team who was just happy to be there, to a team with real, actual title aspirations. They knew with this squad, they could make a run at the NBA Finals. Imagine that, the laughingstock of the league rising up and becoming NBA champions just a few short years later. How incredible would that be? They made quick work of the Jared Dudley Nets and moved on to the juggernaut Raptors. And we all know how that one ended.
You're Philly. It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
Devastating. 1 bounce away. They were 1 bounce away from making the conference finals. After years of torture, they were so close, yet so far at the same time. In the offseason, they had to choose between Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler. They simply did not have enough money for both. They chose Tobias, locked and loaded, and prepared for another season. Disappointing. That was one word to describe the 2019 to 2020 season for the 76ers. It was always going to be tough to match the production they had last year, since he lost Jimmy Butler and JJ Redick. But with them being just 1 bounce away from the Eastern Conference Finals, they were hoping that it'd be enough to make a push forward. Well, when you replace JJ Redick and Jimmy Butler with Josh Richardson and Al Horford, that won't come close to happening. They went 43-30 in a shortened season, and even worse, got swept in the playoffs. And even worse, they had to watch Jimmy Butler, the guy they just let go, lead the Miami Heat to a finals appearance. It looked like the championship window was shut. They were staring down team purgatory after tying so much money into underperforming assets. After 3 years of playoff failures, it may just be over for them. Or not. The next season, the 76ers saw an unprecedented jump in play. Despite getting swept in the first round, after a few short months, they were standing atop of the NBA once again, staring directly at a championship. How? 1. In the offseason, they beefed up the rotation, having multiple other elite spark plugs like Shake Milton and Seth Curry put more onto the load that the original trio of Tobias Harris, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid provided. 2. Defense. The 20th overall pick, Matisse Thybulle, was added onto the rotation and was the perfect perimeter defender they needed. Ben Simmons scoured skyrocketed into DPOY talks while Joel Embiid sat there and manned the paint like usual. They went from a bottom half team to the second best offensive team in the league. 3. Joel Embiid. He made his way into superstar talks this year. His number ballooned up to 28 points. That is 8 more points than a year prior. And he did this on better efficiency. This clunky, holy team had turned into a well-oiled machine. All the parts playing perfectly. They were clicking on all cylinders and looking right at a potential finals trip again. They breezed past their first-round opponent and went to face the 5-seed Atlanta Hawks. They should just book their tickets to the Eastern Conference Finals at this point, right? Finally, after years of torture, the fruits of their labor are finally blooming. The cursed streak will finally be broken. I mean, that's what they thought would happen. Shoot, that's what they expected to happen. They thought Atlanta was an easy matchup. They thought the real comp was after they tossed the Hawks to the side. But for many, many devastating reasons, that wouldn't be the case. The Hawks, for one, played better than what was expected. They stole one game on the road from Philly and pushed the series to 7 games. Yeah, Trae Young was spectacular, but in this series, the Hawks had 5 players outside of him average over 10 points. As for the 76ers, they were in deep trouble. The 76ers themselves didn't play bad as a team. In fact, they played better than the Hawks. Embiid was dominant and Seth Curry was sensational for them. It was just one guy, one player that had stepped in and ruined things entirely for them. I think you know exactly who I'm talking about. Benjamin Simmons was terrible in that series. Irreparably so. In games 5, 6, and 7, Ben Simmons put up a point total of 14 points. Combined.
These bizarre performances wasn't from him missing every single shot he took, but instead from him not shooting the ball at all. Now, Ben Simmons was never the type of guy to shoot 30 shots a game. He always was a pass-first type of player. But in this series, he took it to completely different levels. And this wasn't him being a pass-first player. It was him being so unaggressive and tentative that it was clear he was petrified of shooting the ball. 15 for 45 from the charity stripe. He was never an elite free throw shooter to begin with, averaging around 70 from the line. But in this series, he was abysmal. Multiple late game situations occurred where the 76ers needed clutch free throws from Simmons and he just couldn't hit them. That taxed him mentally, made fans angry, putting more pressure on him, and the more he missed, the more his confidence got shot, to the point where taking the attempt at the basket wasn't even a question. This all came to head when this happened right here. Yep. This clip right here. You guys already know it. Game 7, crunch time with an opportunity to tie the game. Instead of taking the easiest 2 points of all time and dunking it on the 6-foot out of position Trae Young, Ben Simmons was so uncomfortable taking the shot, he opted to dump it off to Matisse Thybulle instead. This was a culmination of everything. A representation of the sheer lack of confidence he had in the moment. The 76ers ended up losing and barely missed the Eastern Conference Finals again. It wasn't fun anymore. The winning, I mean. They were happy to see their team performing well, obviously, but the constant playoff losses, meltdowns, and failures to even make it to the Eastern Conference Finals outweighed these entirely. This series was the worst version of it. Not only was losing to a 5 seed bad enough, but being so close while Ben Simmons, their second best player, collapsed, tore them to shreds mentally. Alas, the Sixers had no choice but to recoup and run it back. They had the talent. For God's sake, they were the 1 seed last year. A better performance from Ben Simmons, and he got their shot in the finals. Again, all they had to do was recoup and take another shot. Yeah, that didn't work out. You remember that heinous collapse that Ben Simmons had? Well, he certainly did. The anguish from that mental collapse carried deep into the offseason, to a point where Simmons completely refused to play. He claimed having a back injury, and when he was finally forced into practice, then claimed to have mental illness issues. He dodged and weaved any attempt at him getting on the court, no matter what was said about him, what the fans said to him, how the NBA threatened to take action, or what anyone from the team said. There was nothing they could say or do to get him back to playing. Why was this? No clue. I don't know the guy. But if I were to speculate, I'd say that ever since that playoff series where he provided nothing offensively for the 76ers against the Hawks, his confidence was low. So low to a point where he simply did not want to be on the court. And it certainly didn't help that Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers sort of made jabs at him after the Atlanta loss. Whatever the reason, Ben Simmons did not want to play for them and was simply biding his time. And the 76ers had no choice but to push forward without him. This is where Joel Embiid exploded. No Ben Simmons, no support. The guy who was arguably just as important to him last year, their glue guy, was gone, adamantly refusing to step foot on the court. And how did Joel Embiid respond to that? By putting his best season to date. His previous season was already an MVP caliber one, being the 1 seed and averaging 28. But this season, this one was different. They were no longer the well-oiled machine that was smoothly chugging along throughout the season. With Ben Simmons gone, that was no longer an option. This season, their success consisted solely on Joel Embiid dragging the 76ers slowly and tediously through this season, step by step, he was trying to fill the gap that Ben Simmons left, and it worked. The Sixers were successful this season. They amassed a record of 37-24, and Embiid was chugging their team along per usual. But eventually, something had to give. The trade deadline was approaching, and Ben Simmons didn't look like he was budging at all. And sure, they were successful, but Embiid carrying them like this wasn't sustainable enough to warrant keeping Simmons in the vault. So when James Harden made it evident that he did not want anything to do with Brooklyn any longer, the stars aligned and the 76ers pulled the trigger, sending Ben Simmons and some other assets for James Harden. This created a new duo of James Harden and Joel Embiid. With Embiid playing like a top player in the league, another star in Harden, and supporting pieces like Maxey, they had enough talent to make their way to the finals. Even though they weren't the 1 seed like last season, this team filled out nicely enough to finally bust into the Eastern Conference Finals. They came into the playoffs as a 4 seed and faced the 5 seed Raptors in round 1. It went well enough. They took a 3-0 lead over them and rounded off winning in 6. Easy enough, right? I mean, they've won in the first round before. That's been the story. The real challenge was getting past the second round. Unfortunately, the next round, they were forced to face playoff Jimmy and the first seeded Heat. You know, the Jimmy Butler they let go in favor of Tobias Harris. I think at this point, you could probably guess what happened.
Tobias Harris over me?
They lost in 6. Another frustrating loss got them. It seemed like no matter what they do or attempt, that hump they need to get over would never be gotten over. The second round seemed practically impossible to pass, but they invested in this duo, and the talent was there too. And honestly, James Harden and Joel Embiid only played 21 games together. Maybe with more time to get acclimated, I'm sure they'd perform a lot better. In that offseason, the 76ers decided to deepen their rotation. Their trade for James Harden made them a little thin, so grabbing guys like PJ Tucker and DeAnthony Melton assisted them greatly. And once again, they were forced to regroup and try again. That's all they could do. The next season, they did see improvement. They won 54 games, and the additions to the rotation helped them defensively. They were no longer missing Simmons' playmaking or scoring since Harden had that down pat. Filling it up made them more complete, almost as complete as the 2020 to 2021 season. Because of this, they earned a 3 seed in the East and had a good shot at being in the finals. But that's always been the story. They've always had the talent, the team. The inability to get over the hump is what killed them. I think you guys know the story by this point. They swept the Nets and ran into the Boston Celtics. Will they finally be able to get over the hump to break the barrier that has tormented them ever since they escaped the process? They took a 3-2 lead up on the Celtics. They had the axe in their hand. All they needed was to make the finishing blow at home in Game 6. And I mean, you guys know what happened. They choked. Surprise. Not only did they lose Game 6, but they lost Game 7 by over 30. Both James Harden and Joel Embiid put up tour dates. Oh my god. Over and over and over and over again. They can't possibly get past the first round. Every time they look like they might be able to get over the hump, just some unexplained event or random occurrence gets in their way. It's not like they don't have the talent too. They have the top end guy, the A1 player. They have more than the sufficient second option to tag along with it. They have a sparky, high potential third option and the pieces on the bench to serve their purpose. When you have the talent and just can't seem to consistently get over the hump, as if you're running to a brick wall, then there's one person that you have to look at. One guy you could point the blame to. The coach. Doc Rivers got tossed to the curb and Nick Nurse replaced him. A guy who did win a championship and has gotten over the hump. Now that that's established, then we could definitely recoup and take another, oh god.
He's a liar, and I will never be a part of an organization.
Jeez, over the offseason, things got sour between Harden and the 76ers front office. The year before, James was an expiring contract and signed a 1-year, $30 million deal, a massive pay cut, under the assumption and probably having their agreement with the organization that after this season, he was going to get his payday. Well, he didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was him shooting 4 for 20 in Game 7, but Morey in the front office did not want to give him that money. Harden got pissed and sat out. Great. So the replacement to Ben Simmons is pulling Ben Simmons. This wasn't exactly the end of the world though. The 76ers thought that Tyrese Maxey could step up into the robbing role that Harden was under, and he actually did a pretty good job at it, putting up 26 points per game and winning the Most Improved Player award. They shipped Harden off and decided to run things back, but as you guys definitely know, that didn't work out. They didn't make the Eastern Conference again. Shoot, they didn't even make it to the second round. They lost to the first round in 6 to the Knicks. Now, to the naked eye, it seems like they were going backwards instead of forwards. And while we reminisced on everything that got us to this point specifically, and looking at the long laundry list of failures year after year they have, and bringing it and tying it all to this point in reality, we have to have an uncomfortable conversation about the 76ers, what they have accomplished, and where they go from here. The process brought the 76ers to the point they're at now. Gave them Joel Embiid, and with him on your team, you always, no matter what, will have a shot at the championship. Which, yeah, will be the purpose of the process, to get the team out of that team purgatory. But at the same time, the horrid and ghastly years this organization has suffered through wouldn't be worth it without a championship. The level that Heinicke brought this team down to wouldn't be justified with 5 second-round losses. Even then, I don't think the 76ers should quit. Not even close. Like I said before, when you have a guy like Joel Embiid, you always have a shot at the championship. You can't be stuck in team purgatory with a guy like him because he's the person you're trying to get to build around. But even there's one major concern. His health. Yeah, I bashed the Sixers for not making the second round a bunch of times, but a lot of his playoff failures were due to some type of injury, whether it was Embiid playing a bit hurt or not playing at all. And while it's not really his fault, hence why I'm saying that restarting is idiotic, if this persists, then I don't know how the 76ers would manage it. Now, even though Embiid has faced a lot of injuries and the 76ers can't control that, they have made a lot, and I mean a lot, of very bad decisions that got them to this point. I think the most obvious place to point at is them picking Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has cemented himself as a playoff superstar. I mean, there were some years where he was considered a top 10 player in the league. Tobias Harris, he's not that. In an elimination game, Game 6 against the Knicks, he dropped a whopping 0 points. 0. While you have Jimmy Butler, who on multiple occasions has been the #1 option on teams that has made the finals. You can't make this up. That decision, the decision to pick Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler, will haunt them for a very long time. But you can't change the past. Best you gotta move forward. And as for moving forward, I don't know what the 76ers really can do. There's rumors circulating that they'll be getting Paul George or someone like that. Whatever. It won't matter if Embiid can't stay healthy, especially during playoff time. But what do you guys think? Do you think the process was worth it? What do you feel like is the most major concern for the 76ers? Comment below. That's all for me. I think I'm out. Peace.